She didn't wield swords. She didn't lead armies. She didn't shout orders in the squares. But with a single touch, she brought the most feared warrior of her generation to his knees. Samson, the chosen one, the consecrated one, the man who tore lions apart with his bare hands and made kings tremble, bowed to a caress. And it wasn't just his body she conquered, but also his pact, his promise, his strength. In the stuffy corridors where the scent of myrrh mingled with sweat and betrayal, Delilah's eyes gleamed with something sharper than any blade, the certainty that the most absolute power came not from war, but from pleasure. In the perfumed bed where gods were forgotten and pacts were broken between purple-dyed sheets, a woman without a crown became queen of an invisible empire, one built within the mind of a man about to lose everything. What made Delilah touch Samson was not love nor hate, but a darker, more ancient, more seductive purpose. And in that gesture, in that hand resting, on a weakened heart, a collapse was born, written long before they existed. Because there are women who don't need thrones. They rule from within secrets. But who was Delilah before Samson? What moved her behind the gentle gaze and the voice that whispered promises while extracting truths? Many call her a traitor, others a spy. But the forgotten scrolls and faded altars reveal something far more dangerous. Delilah was no ordinary woman. She was part of an ancient cult, a circle of priestesses, trained from childhood to master the senses, manipulate emotions and transform men into offerings. There was a secret in her touch, a hidden liturgy behind every kiss, a code hidden in the movement of her fingers through Samson's hair. And this secret was recorded but not in sacred books. It was sealed in the shadows of destroyed temples, where eroticism was part of the rite and pleasure, a sacred weapon. Today, for the first time, we will unearth this mystery. We will reveal who Delilah truly was, what she wanted, and why her touch was capable of destroying a man no army could bring down. But be careful, because once you know this secret, nothing in the Bible will seem the same. Before Samson's last thread touches the ground, before the truth about Delilah is silenced again, leave your like as if sealing a pact, and sign up now, because the next whisper may be the last you hear. Before kings knelt before thrones, before prophets cried out in the desert, there was only silence. The silence that hangs between the veils of incense and the secrets of tents. In a land that breathed hot sand and whispered prayers to the impassive heavens, a time dawned when a man's strength was measured by the brutality with which he destroyed his enemies and by the weakness he demonstrated before a woman. It was the time of the judges, when there was no king in Israel, and each man did what he thought right in his own eyes and in the eyes of desire. It was Samson's time. He was no ordinary warrior. There was no sword at his waist, no armor on his chest. His body was his weapon, his muscles a pact with the divine, his hair an extension of his oath to God. Born under the Nazirite vow, separated from his mother's womb, Samson was a walking promise, a scandal of living power that walked among the Philistines like an omen of destruction. Mothers feared him, enemies hated him, women desired him, but with him also walked the shadow of prophecy. Whoever touched his heart, touched his ruin. And it was in Gaza, a land of foreign gods and forbidden nights, that this shadow took shape. The streets of that city were narrow as disguised intentions, lit by torches that danced with the wind and intrigue. The scent of sin mingled with jasmine in the windows, where women watched with dark eyes and red lips as God's soldiers lost themselves in their own temptations. And among them all, there was one, the quietest, the most dangerous. Her name was a whisper, Delilah. She was no common prostitute, nor a roadside servant. Delilah knew where to place her eyes, how to make silence seem like melody, how to transform waiting into anxiety and presence into hypnosis. She didn't impose herself, she engaged. She didn't ask, she offered. Her body was language, her skin writing, her breath, an ancient language that men learned unintentionally but never forgot. And there, in that kingless time, in a city under foreign rule, amid desecrated altars and silent alliances, she became the greatest enemy Samson could ever defeat, because you cannot defeat what you desire. And when he saw her for the first time, something inside him didn't bend. It broke. Delilah's house wasn't just a dwelling, it was a theater of precisely projected shadows. Its corridors resembled serpents petrified in limestone, every curve an invitation to perdition, every detail designed to confuse the sense of time and direction. There were no straight lines, no visible exits, only the constant sensation that the visitor was walking into themselves or into a trap. The walls were covered in fabrics imported from Phoenicia, dyed the colors of blood, wine, and gold. The floor reeked of the scent of dark wood, mixed with amber, and the lit lamps never cast direct light, only oblique reflections that danced like spirits over the bare skin and half-closed eyes of those who dared to cross the space. In the center stood a polished bronze mirror, not to reflect faces, but to remember sins. It was there, beneath the gaze of this mirror, that men confessed without opening their mouths. Delilah had transformed her home into a temple, not of prayer, but of silent domination. The ceiling was low enough to force any tall man to bow his head, a symbolic gesture she perceived and accepted as reverence. And around the master bed there were no windows, only heavy Egyptian linen curtains that muffled the outside world and created the illusion that time had stopped. No wind, no moonlight, only the heat of desire and the weight of mystery. This space served not only pleasure but strategy. There, the body was not an end, but a means. Delilah didn't seduce as a woman. She seduced as an architect. Every pillow, every quilt, every silently lit thread of incense had a purpose: to neutralize defenses, melt promises, dissolve what remained of faith. The architecture was sensual because it was sacred, according to the precepts of the occult cult to which she belonged. In her training, she had learned that the environment is the first touch, the atmosphere is the first kiss, and that no body surrenders before the space allows it. The bed was merely the final act. In the corner of the main room stood a secret altar, not dedicated to Yahweh, but to an ancient goddess, a lady of fertility and deceit whose name is no longer spoken, but whom many recognize in the figure of women who conquer without raising their voices. Delilah did not worship this goddess. She was this goddess, embodied in the ritual of touch, surrender, and silence. And it was into this scenario that Samson entered, arrogant, strong, invincible. But upon crossing that threshold, he didn't realize his feet were already treading on inverted sacred ground, where men lost more than their strength. They lost their name, their mission, their eternity. Because once inside, no one emerged the same, or they emerged hairless, without a pact, without God. While men negotiated with swords and promises, women forged alliances with their gazes, with their touch, with their bodies entwined in pacts that needed neither ink nor witnesses, only silence and intention. In Gaza, as in so many other Philistine cities, real power lay not in the public squares, but in the dark rooms, in the shared baths, in the whispered conversations between wet veils and aromatic oils. Delilah wasn't alone. There were others like her, women brought from distant lands, sad-eyed Moabites, slender-waisted Edomites, Phoenicians with unfamiliar perfumes, and tongues full of enchantments, each a political gift disguised as desire, each a bargaining chip between empires, tribes, and gods. They were called wives, concubines, lovers, but what they really were living pawns in a game men thought they controlled. And on that board, Delilah was queen. She knew the value of a sigh, the weight of an absence. She knew that the most powerful men tremble not before death, but before the thought of losing what they do not understand. And so she approached Samson, not as an enemy, not as an ally, but as a possibility of tenderness, of rest, of oblivion. A trained woman's greatest weapon is to appear harmless, and when she lay beside him, it wasn't pleasure she offered, it was surrender. The Philistines knew this. Delilah wasn't just a woman in love, she was sent, but not by a king or a general. She was sent by a hidden council of women who understood that male strength is fragile in the face of the female womb. They didn't need to win battles. It was enough for the men to sleep and talk. In the political harem where everyone feigned rivalry, the real wars were fought amidst kisses and caresses. Each woman carried with her an agenda, a god, an empire, and they all knew whoever impregnated the king would shape the future, whoever dominated him would rewrite the prophecy, and whoever destroyed him would make his name eternal. Delilah, however, didn't want children. She wanted memory. She didn't seek an inheritance. She wanted a scar. She didn't want to be remembered as the mother of an heir, but as the one who defeated the invincible. And so, among all of them, she didn't compete with other women. She simply used them as a mirror, as a distraction, as a perfume that precedes the poison. And while they fought over paternity and positions in the bed of power, Delilah studied the enemy. She waited, she watched. And when Samson finally lay beside her, she already knew everything. What he ate, what he dreamed, what made him laugh, and what made him talk. Because there are secrets that the body reveals before the mouth. And in the world of women's rings, secrecy is the most expensive currency. Delilah didn't seduce by instinct. She seduced by tradition. There were rituals, formulas, memories passed down from woman to woman, in languages that had no writing and in gestures that were not taught with words, but with eyes, hands, and silence. In the hidden temple where she was created, the body was an altar, and every part of it an offering that must be anointed, prepared, invoked. Seduction was a liturgy, and before sleeping with a man, she bathed in promises. The bath wasn't just water, it was initiation. The servants mixed goat's milk with lotus petals and saffron, then poured heated oils with spices, brought from lands where the sun burned away the judgment of mortals. The skin was washed as if it were fertile soil, ready to receive divine seed. The hair was styled with bone combs, and another woman's fingers, because no priestess prepares alone. Another woman was needed to determine whether the soul was ready. The purification began without, but its end was within, where true power resides, desire. After the bath came the anointing. First the feet, so the woman would know where she was stepping, then the wrists, so her intentions would be firm, and finally, the breasts and belly, not for what they are, but for what they represent, origin and promise. Around her, the other. Women chanted low, almost moaning chants in languages that no longer exist, asking the gods to grant her the right word, the exact touch, the gaze that shatters walls. The clothing was chosen not for luxury, but for narrative. Translucent Syrian linen fabrics, embroidered with gold threads that formed symbols hidden among the floral designs. Each fold was a pause, each transparency, a lure. Delilah's dress didn't reveal her body, it suggested, and in the game of the sacred, suggesting is more powerful than revealing. Before leaving, she would rub an aromatic resin, known only to women of the cult, over her wrists, a concoction that intoxicated the mind and slowed time for whoever inhaled it. Some men described the sensation as love, others as madness. None emerged unscathed, and then she walked toward him, not with long strides, but with a dance, because the trained woman's walk was choreography, and Samson, upon seeing her, didn't see a woman. He saw an entity. He felt his body stiffen and his soul surrender, not because she was beautiful, but because she was impossible. In those moments, Delilah didn't see herself as a seductress. She saw herself as a bridge between heaven and flesh, between the sacred and the forgotten. She didn't touch Samson to possess him, but to break him, and when her hands rested on the warrior's shoulders, it wasn't pleasure that began. It was a sacrifice. What if bathing were a baptism for sin, and seduction a sacred liturgy? Comment below. Was Delilah a sinner, or a priestess of a forgotten power? It wasn't a room. It was an altar, an invisible theater of sensations beyond description. There, where the body dissolved into sighs and the soul was effortlessly laid bare, every element existed to transform the warrior into an offering. The bed wasn't a place of rest. It was a subtle battlefield, where pleasure was the exact line between ecstasy and surrender. Samson, the hero who faced 1,000 with a donkey's bone, didn't know that within there, a single gesture was enough for his strength to drain away like water through his fingers. The walls were covered with Phoenician tapestries, dyed royal purple, depicting astral symbols and female deities forgotten by the Hebrew scribes. Lighting came from bronze lamps suspended by thin chains, their flames flickering with the slightest sigh, casting dancing shadows. There was no direct light, only soft reflections, golden and reddish, as if everything there was filtered by ancient desire. The scent was cedar incense, myrrh, and something else, something you couldn't buy in markets, an essence made to induce visions, to soften reason, to remind the body that there was no war here, only surrender. On the floor, lambskins covered the cold stone, and around the bed were bowls of cut fruit, dark wine, and small dishes of fig, date, and walnut sweets, not to be eaten, but to fill the air with the scent of abundance. The music came from somewhere unseen. There were no musicians, only soft harps that seemed to emanate from the walls or from Delilah's own womb. They were slow, circular melodies, created to make time dissolve and memories blur. Inside that room there was no yesterday, nor tomorrow, only now. And in that now, Delilah was the priestess and Samson the lamb. The bed had 4 posts carved with scenes of fertility, bodies entwined, hands touching, eyes closed. Above, a translucent linen canopy enveloped the bed like a cocoon. Entering it, Samson was crossing an invisible veil between the world of men and the realm of women. And there, strength had no meaning, rage had no place, only desire was admitted. And once inside, all resistance died. Delilah knew this. She didn't rush the touch, she waited. She let him watch, breathe desire. Because true enchantment happens when a man surrenders willingly, when the body demands what the soul fears. And Samson, amidst skins, scents, and silences, didn't realize he was no longer himself. He was something else, something molded, guided, transfigured. He no longer thought, he only felt. And when she lay beside him, not naked, but shrouded in veils that left more doubt than certainty, he didn't see a body. He saw the promise of peace. And as he rested his head on her lap, he didn't fall asleep as a man. He fell asleep as a victim. There, in the bedroom of the king who never had a throne, an empire crumbled with a kiss. A pact was broken with a sigh, and a secret was about to be ripped out with tenderness. They walked slowly, barefoot on cold marble, their ankles adorned with soundless bells. They wore long dresses, tight but loose enough to conceal blades. Rehearsed smiles, calculated glances, perfume dripped on their wrists like both offering and poison. In the political harem where desire was disguised as devotion, no woman was there by chance. Every concubine, every servant, every wife carried within her a secret mission, a purpose hidden beneath her perfumed skin. The war between them wasn't waged with words, it was waged with silence, with the precise order of their gazes, with the choice of place at the table, with the right moment to appear or disappear. Delilah knew these rules, and so she smiled little. She said even less. She knew that in that world those who talk too much reveal themselves, and that a woman's power lies not in what she shows, but in what she makes others imagine. The women didn't touch each other, but they knew everything about each other, who bled in secret, who dreamed of a king's son, who cried at night out of jealousy over a kiss, who hid letters from generals under their pillows. Every detail was spied on, every absence was analyzed as a threat, because a woman's body was merely the surface of an ancient chessboard where futures, armies, and inheritances were played. Delilah, however, didn't play the same game. She didn't want the king's son. She didn't want the golden ring. She wanted ruin, and that made her dangerous even to those who thought they knew what power was. While the others plotted among themselves, trying to win the heart of some ruler, Delilah wove her presence into the mind of her enemy. She didn't seek love, she sought domination. And that made her not a rival, but an existential threat. Some women were suspicious, others feared her, and there were those who tried to destabilize her with comments disguised as compliments, gifts poisoned with smiles. But Delilah responded with what hurts most to a woman who lives by seduction: absence. She didn't compete. She didn't explain herself. She simply appeared when no one expected. She touched where no one dared, and disappeared before anyone understood what had happened. One night, a dirty veil was placed under her pillow as a sign of dishonor. She didn't react. She simply walked to the center of the hall, danced with her eyes fixed on the ceiling, and finally dropped a drop of wine on a rival's dress. The stain wouldn't come out, not with water, not with salt, and the woman in question was never seen in the palace again. This was the secret language of the invisible war, a war fought with breath, with distance, with imperceptible gestures. And in this war, Delilah was not only victorious, she was the battlefield. Because of all women, she knew the oldest secret. True power isn't in being chosen, it's in choosing. In palaces where men feel like kings, women rule with their wombs, because the future is never born of the sword, it is born of the womb. And in Gaza, as in so many ancient cities that hide more than they reveal, motherhood was not destiny, it was a strategy. Each pregnancy was a gamble, Each birth, a potential throne. It didn't matter what the man said in the hall, what the woman said to her child in the cradle-shaped empires. Wives didn't just want pleasure or presence, they wanted seed. They wanted to be remembered in genealogies, in the songs of the people, in the names of tribes. They wanted children who would inherit their father's strength, but obey their mother's vision, because no powerful woman gives birth by chance. She generates a legacy, teaches a doctrine, plants an army within a name. In those shadowed, oil-soaked corridors, pregnant women were revered as oracles. Their wishes were interpreted as omens. Their nightly dreams were recorded by hidden scribes. If one of them dreamed of a lion, they said her son would be a warrior. If she dreamed of snakes, she would be wise. But if she dreamed of silence, they knew that her womb would bear a dangerous man. Delilah never dreamed of having children. She didn't want an heir. She wanted the end of a lineage. Where others sought continuity, she sought rupture. She didn't want to shape the future with a mother's hands, but to destroy it with a lover's fingers. Because for her, there was no throne to build, only structures to tear down. Yet she knew all the secrets of motherhood. She knew what to eat to get pregnant, what to drink to avoid, what to say to be chosen, and most importantly, when to remain silent to be feared. She watched the other women teaching their sons to use words, to lie with charm, to disguise intentions. Little kings being molded by gentle hands but sharp minds. And she understood that there, in the laps of those mothers, were born not just children, but instruments of power. Future wars were already being planned by those who rocked with one hand and sharpened their blades with the other. The wisest women taught their children to cry when necessary, to embrace those they needed to destroy, to smile at those they harbored hatred for. These were doctrines passed down in lullabies, in stories told in half-light, in advice hidden among the strands of hair combed with devotion, and men never noticed, because they believed that wars were decided on the field, not in the cradle. Delilah alone was an exception. Her childlessness was seen as weakness by some, but for her, it was freedom. An unoccupied womb was a womb open to mystery, and while the others gave birth to futures, she carried only one name, the name of Samson, not in her flesh, but in her memory, and that was enough. Because there are women who don't need to create bodies to mark generations. They create silence, and silence, when it falls upon the powerful, echoes louder than 1,000 voices. While some shaped the future in the cradle, Delilah redesigned it in silence. Who really controls history? Those who create. Heirs or those who erase lineages? What's your opinion? There was more than one altar within that room. One, visible, where lamps burned before images familiar to the people. The other, invisible, pulsed beneath Delilah's skin, in every gesture, in every word intoned with sweetness and venom, because not all gods need temples to be worshipped. Some inhabit the bodies of chosen women, and others are invoked when pleasure, blood, and silence mingle. Delilah did not worship the God of Israel, but she knew his fame. She knew of his promises, his threats, his jealousy. She had heard stories of how he walked with the patriarchs, how he punished nations, how he demanded absolute fidelity. But she came from another lineage, from an ancient people, before the commandments, a people who knelt before goddesses with exposed breasts and stormy eyes, divine women who taught that the flesh is a bridge to the spirit, and that pleasure can also be sacrifice. In the temple where Delilah had been initiated, pleasure was not a sin. It was a ritual. The priestesses bathed naked before the goddess, mixed wine with menstrual blood, and painted their bodies with symbols they called the words that heaven hears. Delilah bore these marks within herself, not visible to Samson's eyes, but vibrating with every movement of her hips, with every perfectly timed kiss. She didn't seduce him, she offered him, and the one receiving it wasn't her. It was something greater, something smiling in the shadows. The other women in the harem also worshipped their own gods. The nights in Gaza were punctuated by chants in forgotten languages, by prayers whispered beneath veils, by small offerings buried at the foot of palm trees or hidden among the stones of the courtyard. An altar to Astarte, a lit candle to Baal, a stone anointed with milk in honor of Anat. It was a Babylon of feminine devotions, forbidden but alive. And the more the men imposed their laws, the more the women faithfully disobeyed them. Delilah, however, didn't mix. She fused. She transformed prayer into moaning, incense into skin perfume, the temple into a bedroom. Each night with Samson was a clandestine cult where his god was absent and her goddess smiled. And the scariest thing? Samson felt it. He felt he was in foreign territory, that his spirit trembled as he crossed that threshold. But he returned, always, because some rituals are addictive and some sins seem like prayers. Delilah didn't force him. She simply opened the doors, and each time he entered, he left a little more of his faith on the stone floor, because there is nothing more powerful than a sanctuary where pleasure and the sacred walk hand in hand. And in that bed, Yahweh was but a distant memory. The gift was hers, from the nameless, templeless, and unforgiving goddess, and Samson's covenant was already being changed. The fall never begins with the abyss. It begins with exhaustion, with the comfort of repetition, with the false security of thinking one can touch danger and emerge unscathed. Samson believed he controlled the game, that his strength, his fame, his closeness to God were enough to keep everything under control. But control had already been exchanged for pleasure. He no longer controlled his steps. He was guided by the body of a woman who smiled silently as she dismantled, piece by piece, the man chosen from the womb. At first, they were just questions. "Where does your strength come from?" she asked, her voice intoxicated with wine and perfume. He laughed. He made up stories. New ropes, intertwined braids, symbolic bonds, lies told between kisses and caresses. He thought it was funny. He thought it was powerful. But each false answer revealed something true. He needed her more than she needed him. And this, she realized. The city began to change. The Philistines, once fearful, began to smile in the streets. The people, once quiet, murmured songs about the hero who slept too much, who no longer prayed, who avoided the temple. The elders shook their heads and the prophets fell silent, because they knew. A man's downfall begins when he no longer hears his inner voice, but only the whispers of a woman with the perfume of a strange altar. Delilah didn't rush the end. She cultivated it, with ritual patience, like someone sharpening a blade without showing the edge, like someone feeding a sacrificial ox. Each night was another dose, a loose rope, a forgotten vow, an unspoken prayer. And Samson's spirit, once filled with the divine presence, emptied like an old wineskin. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she waited for him to fall asleep with his head in her lap. She waited for the moment his breath became a breeze, and then she asked, not in a questioning voice, but tenderly, with hands in his curls, with kisses between her fingers. And he answered, not out of weakness, but out of exhaustion, because there's a point where pleasure breaks down defenses. And at that point, he spoke. If my braids are cut, my strength will leave me. She smiled, not with triumph, but with certainty, like someone completing a cycle, like someone fulfilling a destiny written long before their meeting. He stood, called the men, and readied the scissors, but he didn't cut yet. He sat back down and rocked him as if he were a child, because the cut shouldn't be abrupt, it should be liturgical. Outside, the people slept, but the pillars of the spiritual temple were already trembling, because a covenant was being torn apart, with the hairs of a chosen one, and the sky remained silent. The cut made no sound. There was no blood, no scream, only the muffled sound of blades sliding over the braids that for years had carried the promise of a people. Samson's strength was not lost in combat, not even in the face of 1,000 men. It was ripped away by a woman in a dark room to the sound of slow breathing and hands that knew exactly where to cut, not the strands, but the link between the divine and the mortal. And as the last lock touched the ground, something invisible snapped in the heavens. Delilah didn't tremble. She didn't hesitate. She had done this before, not with him, but with others. In other times, with other names, because her lineage was ancient. It didn't come from kings or prophets. It came from women who were burned, erased, forgotten. Women who knew that brute force always fears the delicate touch, that male gods always remain silent before the hidden goddess, the one who doesn't appear in the texts but lives between the lines. The Bible calls her a traitor. Tradition reduces her to a prostitute, but the truth is more uncomfortable. Delilah was a priestess. She was an instrument of a force older than Israel, a feminine, telluric, silent force that needs no temple because it inhabits the body. What Samson faced was no ordinary woman. It was a cult disguised as skin, a prophecy clothed in desire, and he lost because he underestimated the invisible. Upon awakening blind and weak, he tried to get up, but it was too late. The Philistines surrounded him, his eyes were gouged out, and he became what he feared most, a prisoner bound by invisible chains. But the imprisonment had begun long before. It began with the first knock, with the first answer delivered amidst pleasure. It began when he stopped listening to the voice from heaven and followed the sound of the lamps flickering in her breath. Delilah was never seen again, not by men. She vanished like the sound of an extinguished candle, but her mark remained, not in the temple destroyed by Samson before his death, but in every man who after him doubted a woman's strength, in every story told without mentioning her true name, in every religion that tries to bury feminine power under commandments. She lives, in other names, in other voices, but always lurking, because the greatest secret of the Bible is not what was written, it's what was erased. And when you read Scripture without the shadows, you only see half the story, the visible half. The other half, whispers between the lines, dances in Delilah's eyes, breathes in the dark rooms where promises are undone with a kiss, and sacred covenants are broken by love, anger, or justice. The truth is that Samson fell for love, but Delilah rose as a myth, and it remains to this day a sacred reminder that the right touch at the right time can bend what no army can tear down. Delilah left no heirs, but it left traces, and today you followed them to the end, between veils, pacts, and cuts that were not made with blades, but with intention. If this crossing sparked something in you, leave your like as if lighting a lamp in front of a forgotten altar, and sign up now, because other names whisper from the shadows, and none of them want to be forgotten again. The story that is appearing on your screen now carries a new secret, darker, older, and perhaps truer than you are prepared to hear. Cross over if you wish, but know this: there is no return after the next veil.